Oops, missed it.
Jury's in the courtroom.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Welcome back, and we get Dr. Simons back up here. You want her on the stand, Ms. Corey?
Please.
Doctor.
Dr. Simons, to finish up on gunshot wound number 3, I believe I asked you, was it alone fatal?
No, it was not.
All right, let me show you states 156 in evidence. And can you explain that to the jury, please?
Yes, and so this is a photo that shows the injuries that we looked at when Jordan Davis was laying on his stomach. This was the crease that I had mentioned sort of as a reference point, this being that entrance wound and this being the exit wound.
And again, for just a brief moment, can you put an E on the entrance wound and an X on the exit wound?
And so just for orientation, we're looking going towards the feet on the right leg, towards the feet on the left leg. This would be the area of the genitals, and this would be going towards the belly button. Dr.
Dr. Simons, again, is gunshot wound number 3 up within the interior of Jordan Davis's legs underneath his buttocks?
Yes.
Okay. States Exhibit 157. Can you explain that one to the jury?
Yes, and that would be more of a close-up shot of the entrance wound.
And then states 158.
And so this is a photograph. Again, so this being towards the feet on the right leg, left leg, and towards the belly button. This is injury number 2 that we talked about, but this is that pair of wounds for number 3 with the entrance and the exit. And then this metal rod is what I refer to as a probe, and that is just to show the track of the bullet, and you can see the skin lifting up a little, and that just indicates that this stayed very close underneath the skin, what we would call a superficial track.
Yes, ma'am. Doctor, earlier you testified to examining the clothing and the cuts that had been made by rescue. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you take a close-up photograph of the shirt to be able to show the jury what the gunshot entry looks like?
The photographer that was on took those photographs. Yes, that's correct.
Yes, ma'am. States 160 in evidence. Can you explain both the large photo and the inset photo?
Yes, so this is that tank top that we looked at that had been sewn back together, and this was the area that I referred to, which would have had a medical, a cut from medical intervention, and this is the round circle that I was referring to, and you can see it here more in close-up, and that would represent the same region as the entrance wound on the right side of the chest.
All right. Dr. Simons, would it aid this jury for you to be able to discuss these 3 gunshot wounds in conjunction with each other, as well as in conjunction with their relative path through Jordan Davis's body?
Yes.
In order to do that, would you like to use the anatomical doll that we call Bendy?
Yes,
Okay.
that would be fine.
And for purposes of this, did you use dowels that you yourself placed through Bendy or the doll for, I really don't know what to call it.
Bendy's
Bendy.
fine.
Thank you, Judge. That you used to place through this Bendy?
I did. I placed those dowels, and just the one kind of caveat that I want to give about using a mannequin, I'd also like to, if it's okay, demonstrate some of this on myself, again, just to show you a range of motion that I can't possibly demonstrate on that mannequin because it's very stiff and has limited movement.
Let me ask you a few facts or hypotheticals. As an expert, you're allowed to consider this. Let me ask you then to consider that Jordan Davis was in a vehicle when he was shot.
Yes.
That there's been testimony that the gunshots went through, 3 gunshots went through his door, that he was in the right rear passenger door. Have you reviewed photographs of that door?
Yes, I have.
Have you actually observed the door itself?
Yes, I have.
Have you observed photographs with dowels going through the door?
Yes, I have.
And then did you yourself observe the door with the dowels going through it?
With dowels that I had placed through the door, yes.
Did you also observe photographs where the evidence technician had put dowels through those doors?
Yes, I did.
Do you consider that you've had sufficient time to observe the photographs taken by Detective Kipple, as well as the photographs taken when you yourself observed the car, and sufficient time to study the dowels through the door
Yes.
at this point in time?
Yes, I have.
And then did you yourself carefully review your notes before your testimony about the bullet paths through Jordan Davis's body?
Yes, I did.
And do you feel like you had sufficient time to put those dowels through the bendable form?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Doc, may she come down from the stand?
Yes, ma'am.
Doctor, let me ask you first, and do you prefer to use the form first or demonstrate on yourself?
Probably myself first, if that's okay.
Hang on, Doctor, we need a microphone for you.
Oh, for her. Thank you. I was so proud of myself.
That doesn't sound like it's working.
Is it on? It takes a second. Are you talking into it? Test. Judge, she can have mine and I'll use this
Well,
one.
let's see
Yes, sir.
where we are on that.
Check, sound check.
Test.
Okay.
Okay.
And doctor, I'm sorry, did you say you prefer to start by showing on yourself?
I think I'll start on myself. That'll probably be the easiest way. We need to look at these as independent wounds instead of trying to consider this as one body position that can account for all of those wounds happening at the same time. And it's really easy to sort of fall into that trap and say, okay, what's the one position? So what I'm going to do is explain to you 3 separate wounds and possible range of positions that Jordan Davis could have been in as a right rear passenger in that vehicle. So I was able to see the vehicle, see the bullet heights off of the seat, see what the size of the compartment was and the shape of it relative to somebody inside of that vehicle, and where those bullets came through the door. And I was able to match those bullet wounds with the bullet holes through a range of motions. So I'm going to just ask you to consider the fact that you have a person in a situation, and that person is communicating with somebody who is not inside the vehicle with them outside that vehicle, and they're responding. And so, they get a sense of what's going on and might feel a little bit of...
Your Honor, I would object. This is outside the scope.
Sustain.
Go to the facts that you've
Okay.
reviewed yourself.
Okay, so there is a position within the vehicle of Jordan Davis. There is the passenger door. There's the seat behind him and the seat in front of him. He's in a position where his legs are in front of him, of course, although we don't know where up on the seat he might be seated. And there's a range of motion that a person might engage in when they want to move, possibly protect themselves. And that range of motion includes reaching over for cover, trying to duck, trying to lift the leg up. And the reason that this is important is because with a shot coming from the door into the chest, to have that diagonal position become horizontal based on the bullet track through the door, we need to account for the body bending over.
Doctor, how did the picture of the liver play into your determination in this? Why was that significant?
Okay, so as you saw in the picture of the liver, the wound started here and the bullet track ended about here on the left armpit. So using my elbow to show you the starting point and the tips of my fingers to show you the ending point, we have a diagonal wound, okay? And that is in a fixed organ such as the liver. So we have a bullet track through the door that's roughly horizontal. And in order to have a horizontal plane of bullet going through the body, if the body was just sitting upright, horizontal would start here on the right and end roughly here on the left. But in this particular case, we see that it ended here. And the way to make this diagonal track horizontal is to bend over, and now you can see that a horizontal path will be coming straight across and affect the body in a diagonal way when it's in the anatomic position, but in a functional position, we have this track.
Doctor, is there any way that that's consistent with the body leaning out of the door?
That's not consistent with the
Okay.
body leaning out of the door.
And while we're talking about that first gunshot wound, doctor, let me ask you to stand as though you're standing between the door and the car. If you'll just stand up and assume that this is the end of the car, the end of this table. Is it consistent with the position you're in right now as though you're facing the back seat to get back into it?
So if this is, I'm sorry, if this is the car door here, and this is the back seat?
No,
Is
ma'am,
that
I was thinking the way you were sitting, as if you had stepped out of the car and were between the door.
Oh, okay, so if I've stepped out, here's the seat.
Yes, ma'am.
And I am trying to get back in the vehicle, and the door is on this side of me.
Yes, ma'am.
From what I saw, when I examined the vehicle, I don't believe that there is enough room to account for a range of motions that could have allowed Jordan Davis to sustain 3 injuries that I saw the wound paths for by being outside of the vehicle, no.
All right. Doctor, would it aid you to be able to hear the sequence of shots as far as how quickly they would fire?
Yes.
Okay. Get that ready. And let me go on then, doctor, to ask you to demonstrate gunshot wound number 2 to the jury on yourself.
Okay. And so now again, we're talking about a range of motion, kind of a continuum. If somebody is trying to make a move in their seat, maybe make some sort of evasive or protective action, they're going to try and duck, they're going to get small, they're going to crouch and do anything they can to change their position. And so wound number 2 is the shot that went through the left thigh. Now we have 2 shots that came through the door that were on a slightly downward track as opposed to the 1 shot that was a little more roughly horizontal. And I believe that those 2 slightly downward tracks were the ones that created the wounds on the inner right thigh and the left thigh, although I wouldn't be able to tell you which bullet created which path. But in the continuum of moving, you have somebody who is ducking and moving, and you can now see how we've exposed this thigh from the left thigh with clearance of this thigh and further exposed the back of the right thigh in order to be able to get 2 shots that otherwise would have appeared between the legs, now appear just like somebody who is in a movement either ducking for cover or getting hit and then further falling backwards.
Dr. Simons, is there anything with regards to gunshots wounds number 2 and 3 consistent with Jordan Davis leaning outside of the car?
No.
Okay. And what about with regard to him standing in between the door and the car?
No, I believe that the angle that would have been needed and the heights of the injuries and the location could not have allowed enough motion. It's too compact of a space for him to have been able to move and pivot his body in a way that you could have sustained a shot on the front of the left thigh and then from the back on the right thigh as well as the chest.
And doctor, let me ask you to again appear as though you're standing between the back passenger seat, right passenger seat, and the door itself. And ask you, ma'am, where would the gun, the barrel of the gun, had to have been to fire into Jordan Davis's body underneath his buttocks?
Well, given the path of the bullet.
If standing, I'm presuming for this purpose you're standing.
In order to have an angle that would have gone slightly upward here and straight across, you would have had to have somebody firing a shot from down here and also lower across the thigh.
Would that have been in the V of the door?
I don't see how it could have been in the V of the door. I'm not sure how that could have been accomplished.
All right. Ms. Orbis? Do we still need a minute? Are we ready? Doctor, I'm going to ask you to listen to evidence that's already been in front of this jury with regard to the sequence of the gunshots, and if you'll just go through the whole thing for a minute. Just the shots. Can you listen carefully, Doctor? Thank you. Dr. Simons, was that sufficient for you to hear the quickness of the sequence of those shots?
Yes.
Dr. Simons, is it possible for Jordan Davis to have sustained, if the first 3 shots were to his body, is it possible that he sustained any of those shots and was able to then dive back into the car?
I don't believe that he would have been able to make it into the vehicle. I believe that he would have probably been, if he was outside the vehicle, partially outside of the vehicle, that he wouldn't have made it in with it and been able to shut the door behind him.
And let me ask you, Dr. Simons, if gunshot wound number 1 actually was the first shot that pierced his heart and lodged in his chest, would he have dropped right there?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. But if all 3 gunshots hit as quickly as a sequence of those bullets, would that have debilitated him and his ability to dive into a car?
Yes, but you know, the plain and simple fact from what I could see from the clearance on that door, there wasn't room for him to dive, so.
Okay. Doctor, I'm going to show you 3 photographs. If you'll go back to the stand just for these next 3 photographs, and then I'll ask you to get back off the stand. If you'll go back to the stand for the next 3 photographs.
Okay.
And these are photographs taken by Detective Kipple and testified to, but let me start with states number 93. And ask you, Doctor, did you examine this photograph prior to giving testimony here today?
Yes, I did.
Did you study it in great detail?
Yes, I did.
And understanding that Detective Kipple, the evidence technician, is the person who placed those dowels, did this help you come to your determination as to what was consistent with Jordan Davis's position at the time he was shot 3 times?
Yes.
How does this photograph aid you, and how can you aid the jury in understanding it?
So I'm focusing on the 3 paths through the right rear passenger door and looking at the angle of those. And, you know, from the way the probes are placed, I can see that the more forward probe indicates a roughly horizontal position, and the other 2 are coming down at something of a little bit more of a downward angle, and I can locate the position of where the bullets entered through the door based on this photograph.
Did you also examine states number 97?
Yes, I did.
And did this picture taken by Detective Kipple aid you in your determination and in determining the position in which Jordan Davis was at the time those 3 gunshots entered his body?
Yes, and they helped in the same way. They enabled me to see, you know, that 1 was roughly horizontal and 2 were somewhat more downward, and to also see the relative height of where those entered relative to the seat.
Okay. States number 95.
And again, those also helped relative to the seat. And when you are looking at this, in my opinion, this upper trajectory would be the one that was consistent with entering the chest, and the lower trajectories were the ones that were consistent with entering the thighs. Now you're looking at these and you see these probes coming in at an angle towards the seat, and so it's also very important to remember that when somebody is sitting in that seat, they depress the seat, so they're actually sitting a little bit lower than what it looks like, because those probes do look close, but you know they've got weight, so their body's going to be a little bit lower. But from this, I wouldn't be able to tell you which of those shots went into the left thigh and which went into the right thigh.
Dr. Simons, states 95 shows the door completely closed. Is that consistent with your opinion based on your ability as a forensic pathologist.
Yes.
Did you want to see this car for yourself before rendering an opinion to this jury?
Yes, I did.
And did you do that?
Yes, I did.
Did you take a photographer to assist you?
Yes, I did.
And did someone who was with you also place dowels in the same exact location as those 3 photographs?
I placed those dowels myself, and I brought with me printouts of the evidence technician's photos for reference and made sure that I could place them in a way that was close enough to make a common sense judgment as to whether or not I had come close enough and a common sense judgment as to whether or not those matched with my opinion of Jordan Davis's position within the car.
And Dr. Simons, is it fair to say that because you were able to do the wound track of the bullet that went through his liver and his heart based on the stationary position of the liver,
Overruled.
did that assist you in making this entire determination about Jordan Davis's position in that vehicle?
It assisted me much earlier than reviewing the photographs. It assisted me at the time of autopsy, with the information from the investigator prior to proceeding to the autopsy. We have internal investigators. Knowing that he was a right rear passenger, when I saw the wound tracks and I saw that path in the liver, it made perfect sense that he was sitting and probably was ducking or rotating in the seat in a way.
All right. And Doctor, let me show you 3 photographs that you and your staff took on that day and ask you, Dr. Simons, why did you take a photograph with the door completely open?
So I wanted to see what the clearance of that door was relative to the inner compartment and relative to where those bullet holes on the door were, could a person be inside, outside, things like that. And so
let me stop you for 1 second. Did you try to make an assumption as to whether or not that door was even capable of being fully opened that night at the scene when Jordan Davis was shot?
Well, the photos that I took are based on the assumption that there's a possibility that the door could be open if those facts are presented. And so I didn't limit myself during the course of my evaluation.
All right.
So I, again, in a common sense way, this was in no way meant to be a reconstruction. The vehicle had been moved, and I didn't have the benefit of seeing the vehicle in position. So what I'm trying to do is get a sense of whether or not my interpretation of Jordan Davis's position is plausible. So I look at the angles of the door, and as you all know, when you try to open your door, if your hands are full, it's great if you get it to pop into one of those 2 positions, and if it doesn't, it swings back at you and kind of knocks your bags out of your hands or knocks you over. So I focused on the 2 positions that the door remained propped open with, and then the closed position. So one was what I considered to be close to fully open, and then one that was at roughly another angle, about 45 degrees, and then fully closed. Fully closed.
States 135.
And so this way I could see how the paths of those bullets might have changed, and whether or not somebody standing between that door and the seat or the compartment of the car could have sustained all 3 of those wounds in succession.
All right, Doctor, in comparing your photograph, states 135, to Detective Kipple's photo with his orange dowels through it, with regard to the back seat door only, do those dowels appear to be in the same position as Detective Kipple's dowels?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And Doctor, did you take the pictures with the door slightly open or fully open because you believe that's the position in which Jordan Davis could have been?
No, I took those photos in the partially open and fully open because, again, I am trying to think through that if somebody is outside of their vehicle in the middle of some sort of incident, the door is going to either be propped open or they're not going to be able to be standing there with it and doing something.
All right. And Doctor, for purposes of your testimony here today, is it important in understanding these 3 gunshot wounds to Jordan Davis's body to consider the quickness of the sequence of the shots that hit Jordan Davis, is that an important factor?
It is.
Okay. Is it important, the testimony of the other eyewitnesses as to whether or not he was in a seated position when he was shot?
To me, I made that judgment independently, but to the court, I can't answer that question of what the significance is.
All right. And then the determination, your determination as an expert as to which wounds were gunshot wounds of entry.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything about the gunshot wounds to Jordan Davis's body that leads you to believe that he was leaning in any way out the door, out the window, or to his right at all?
No.
Okay. Now, would it aid the jury to see dowels through the bendable form and hear your testimony about why you believe Jordan Davis was shot while seated inside the vehicle?
Yeah, I think the benefit of seeing the dowels is you can be reminded of that path, and so throughout it I will also remind you, that the body has a little more flexibility. So,
You want to make sure you step down.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Simons, I'm going to ask you to assume the following facts. Assume that this table is the back seat, and it's not a great back seat, but it is the back seat where Jordan Davis was seated in the red Dodge Durango. And did you look at the pictures of the front seat and the other pictures of the Durango?
yes, I did.
Okay. And I want you to assume that there is a car parked at some distance next to the red Dodge Durango. Okay. I want you to assume further that the testimony says that the shooter was firing the first shots from the driver's window and that he was firing with a 9mm Luger.
Okay.
And I want you to assume further that the sequence of those 3 shots was, as you heard in the audio that was played just moments ago. Can you use the bendable form, Bendy, to show this jury what you believe about Jordan Davis's position in that vehicle as he was shot?
Yes.
Okay. Do you need help with that?
I don't think so. So, just as a starting ground, don't feel that the arms came into play.
Well, hold on 1 minute. Let me ask you about that. Tell the jurors why you don't believe his arm was resting on the windowsill or out the windowsill like this. I'm pointing my arm as though it's resting on the open window of the car and out of the car.
Well, I wouldn't really be able to speak to it being out of the vehicle. I can tell that it wasn't at his side because a chest shot with his arm right at his side would have gone through his arm first.
Okay, go ahead then.
And so we'll kind of move these out of the way. And again, assume that he is making a maneuver from a sitting position into a ducking position. You can see, again, the entry on the lower right side heading up towards the left armpit. And just to be clear, the pink on the left side doesn't mean that the bullet exits, just to remind you of that path that we discussed. So here, sitting in the upright position in the seat, we can see that dowel is in that diagonal position.
Right.
But
Doctor, let me ask you a question. If Jordan Davis was seated upright, would the person firing the gun had to have been down here?
yes.
Right next to him, down here?
Right next to him down there, I don't believe that those bullets could have gone through the door in that instance.
Okay, go on then.
And so in this case, again, we've got this diagonal path, but as you watch the body tip over and bend over, you can see that path once again become horizontal and more closely match that upper track of the bullet through the door, which is roughly horizontal. And so then looking at the other 2 wounds, this is kind of a challenge because with my leg, you could see I can rotate in, out. The mannequin cannot rotate in and out, and so there are some difficult angles. But in this position, when you have somebody who is now bent over and they're lifting their legs up, you can now see how this dowel can be coming from outside on the door and through the door and be hitting the orange dowel, for example, be hitting the inner aspect of the right thigh. And with this leg up in the air, again, you can now see that with a person in this position, how the green dowel can have come through that door and caught the inside of the left thigh.
Dr. Simons, based on your full examination of Jordan Davis's body and the 3 gunshot wounds that traversed his body, do you believe in your medical expertise, your forensic pathologist expertise, that Jordan Davis was standing up outside of the vehicle when he was shot?
I do not.
Do you believe that he was leaning outside of the vehicle through an open door when he was shot?
I do not.
Do you believe he was leaning out through an open window when he was shot?
No.
Do you believe he was in any way leaned towards the right-hand side of his car, towards the side where the shooter was when Jordan Davis was shot?
No.
In what position do you believe Jordan Davis was based on your expertise when he was shot?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This has been asked and answered several times at this point.
Well, this will be it,
Yes, sir.
overruled.
I believe that Jordan Davis was seated in the right rear passenger seat, and I believe that at the time the bullets hit his body, he was leaning over towards the left and in motion.
Thank you. You can resume to stand. I have nothing further, Dr. Simon, Your Honor.
Do you need the bendy?
I do not, Your Honor.
Ms. Corey, if you can have somebody remove bendy,
Judge, we're
please.
going to ask that Bendy remain so that it remains with the clerk for the duration of the trial in case anyone requests to see it or use it for demonstrative purposes. We don't want there to be a situation where the gallows get moved around. For purposes
All right,
of
that's fine. I want it removed from
Okay, go
that
back to the-
position.
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, so if I can get one of the bailiffs just to take it, put it back in that room over there to the side. And then Ms. Hannity, if you need it, let me know. Ms. Hannity, across.
Yes, Your Honor.
Good morning, Dr. Simons.
Good morning.
Ma'am, I want to try to take this in a little bit of a methodical order. One of the things that I remember that you were asked on during direct is the number of autopsies that you performed by the time in November 2012 you performed this particular autopsy on Jordan Davis. I don't believe that we got that. What was that, Dr. Simons?
Oh, I would not be able to estimate how many I had performed up until this point.
And you had started, I know that you said you had started in 2011. When in 2011 had you started?
July 2011.
Certainly, would you agree, ma'am, that the number of autopsies you performed in November of 2012 is much less than the 1,000 that you indicated that you performed over the course of your career to this date?
It would be a fraction of the total number, that's correct.
Now, Dr. Simons, you talked a good deal about the clothing and about the fact that some changes had been made to the clothing because of medical intervention. Were you the person who re-sewed the clothing in order to present it this way?
No, I was not.
Okay. Now, you talked about the fact that because medical responders sometimes have to cut through the clothing, that you may sometimes have to look a little harder to see evidence of bullet holes in the clothing. Would that be fair to say?
That's correct.
Now, going back to, if I may go up and double check it, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am. You looking for an exhibit number?
I am, and I still get
It
it.
might be on the top, which,
It's at the bottom, but I still can't read it
oh,
because of my eyes. But,
it is at the bottom? Okay.
I believe it's 177.
Yes, 177, which is the exhibit number for the long pants.
Thank you. Dr. Simons, I want to refer you back to exhibit number 177, which is the long pants, as His Honor just said.
Yes.
In taking a look at that particular item, there appear to be at least 2 cuts to the clothing that you're indicating were probably made by, like you said, the medical responders, right?
Yes.
And am I correct in saying that both of those cuts are on the outside of the pants legs on each side? In other words, running down the outside of each leg, and then you need to get
Yeah, I
a
would,
look.
sure, I'd be happy to do that. That is correct, yes.
And Dr. Simons, would it be fair to say that there's no evidence of any cutting by anyone along the back of the pants legs?
There are some defects that are sharp type of defects on the right rear pocket that I don't know how those got there. And so those are defects on the back, but on the back portion of the pant leg, not that I see.
Okay, and that there's no evidence of any cutting along the interior of the pants legs, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and in those areas of the pants leg that would generally be associated with the areas where you discovered the bullet wounds, you found no evidence of bullet holes, correct?
I found no evidence of bullet holes, but again, I did see another defect along the waistband, and as I mentioned before, there are times that we don't know the position of the clothing on the body, and in many cases, I have found no holes corresponding to what are clearly injuries that occurred based on there being holes in other garments that were overlying or underlying.
My question, Dr. Simons, is that in the areas that you've demonstrated to this jury, on both yourself and on the anatomical doll, the defect in the waistband would not have correlated to either wound number 2 or wound number 3 as you've described it. Would that be fair to say?
I don't believe so, no. I believe that, again, we don't know the position of the clothing. Clothing twists, we don't know how those pants fit on Jordan Davis, and I'll give you an example. He has a belt on those pants. He's seated in a seat that might have some friction, and as he's moving, those pants catch, and so the pants get lowered down on his body by the time he's lifted his legs. I can't speak to where those pants were on his body, but I can tell you that I did not find a bullet hole.
Okay. And what you can say is that those pants were sent to you from Shands Hospital and represented as being Mr. Davis's pants. You can't necessarily even say that. Would that be fair to say?
I received those pants with the body. They came with the body with the representation that they were part of his belongings.
Yes. Now, Dr. Simons, I'd like to take you through, in terms of your testimony of the wounds. Let's start, as you did on your direct, with what you've delineated as wound number 1. Okay?
Yes.
Now, that's the wound that's been described as the abdomen and chest wound, the one that entered from the right of the torso and ended near the left armpit. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in this particular wound, you identified an entrance and exit wound. Is that right?
No, I've identified an
I'm sorry, an
wound.
entrance, and then there was no exit wound, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. How do you go about determining entrance and exit wounds?
So we look for typical characteristics for entrance and exit wounds. And for an entrance wound, a typical characteristic would be a ring of abrasion. And when a path can be clearly traced from a wound to a bullet, uninterrupted, we can consider that open path to be an entrance wound. So in this case, there are two factors that I looked at. One, a bullet with no exit and a clear path from that hole, and two, the characteristics of that hole on the right side of Jordan Davis's body.
Generally speaking, let's say wound number one, you do, say you have an entrance and an exit wound.
Yes.
Okay? How do you determine which is an entrance wound and which is an exit wound?
So you need to look at this in the context of all factors. You need to look at it in the context of which direction the bullets may or may not have been coming from, the theoretical position of the person, whether or not there was anything that the person might have been leaning on to make an exit wound appear similar to an entrance wound, and whether or not you find projectiles in the body at a clear path. Again, we also look for things like stippling and soot, but when we have what we call intermediate targets, such as clothing or a door, we cannot use those to help us figure out which was the entrance and which was the exit.
Dr. Simons, let's consider a situation in which you are presented with an autopsy in which the decedent has been killed by gunshot wound, and you don't have any witnesses to tell you the potential position of the decedent or the potential position of a shooter. You're confronted with an entrance with two wounds to a body, okay, that was caused by a projectile of some kind. Without that extraneous situation, can you make a determination as to entrance and exit wound?
Yes, I can.
Okay. How do you go about doing that when you don't have that information?
Again, I look at the features of each wound. Are you specifically asking me to describe a certain scenario you have in mind?
No, what are the typical characteristics of an entrance wound, aside from the abrasions you've already talked about, and potential soot and stippling, which we know doesn't apply in this case?
It depends on the firearm, the gun, and the ammunition type. Okay. And so, in general, depending on the range of fire, you might have a variation on an entrance wound that you wouldn't see, that you would see in a contact wound versus a non-contact wound. So the question that you're asking me is a very generalized question.
Yes.
So the generalized answer is I look at the characteristics, and I fit those to a scenario of potentially what might have happened and which is more likely to be an entrance and an exit wound.
Okay. And again, let's take out scenarios where I'm not asking you about potential contact wounds. And just for the jury's knowledge, a contact wound is what you're talking about, and obviously you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is when the muzzle of the gun is pressed up against the body when the gun is fired. Is that correct?
That is correct, okay. when there's direct contact with.
All right. Well, say we're not talking about that either, okay? So you indicated the situation in terms of the ammunition. What effect does, say, a 9mm projectile, or a projectile that can be fired from a 9mm, what typical characteristics does that show on entrance wounds?
And there are general characteristics that are used. Okay, so you would need to give me more specifics because, again, did that bullet hit an intermediary target such as a door? Did that bullet go through clothing? Was that bullet fired from a distance or not a distance? You're being very vague, and I can only give you a vague answer. Okay. I look at the characteristics.
That's fine. So let's talk about exit wounds now, because at this point, the bullet has entered the body and has now exited the body. What are the typical characteristics that a projectile fired from a 9mm Luger would have? What typical characteristics would you look for to determine an exit wound?
Regardless of the ammunition, I would be looking at characteristics of an exit wound that again were in conjunction with what happened to that bullet before it entered the body and along its path through the body. If a bullet fragments within the body and exits as a sliver, that's different than a full entire bullet exiting. If a person is leaning up against something in a way that creates what we call a short exit, where that bullet has to poke through skin that's pressed up against something and could cause a ring of abrasion, that might make a bullet appear to be an entrance when it's really an exit, and that would be something that would be challenging. So again, in answer to your question, if you give me a scenario, I would be happy to tell you what I'd look for, but
Okay.
in general, just features.
All right. Now, Dr. Simons, let's take a look specifically at the entrance wound that you described for wound number 1.
Yes.
And what is the size of that entrance wound that you describe in your report for wound number 1?
So the full defect is 1 5/10 centimeters by 1 centimeter, and it's oval in shape, and that includes the circumferential margin of abrasion.
Okay. And then going to the description that you've given for wound number 2, you give in this particular case a description of the entrance wound. Is that correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And what is the description of that entrance wound?
That is 1 9/10 centimeters by 7/10 centimeters, including the skin tears and a smaller rim of abrasion that was pink in color.
And then as to gunshot wound number 3, you for this particular wound, describe both an entrance and an exit. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And how did you describe the size of the entrance wound?
The entrance wound was 1 5/10 centimeters by 1 1/10 centimeter, including a dark abrasion margin, which was not completely circumferential, meaning it only went partially around a clock face, if we were to look at it in terms of a clock face. Again, representing an angle of entry, so an abrasion that wasn't a full circle. And also described some skin flaps.
Okay. And then in terms of the exit wound that you described for gunshot wound number 3, how did you describe the size of that?
So the size of that was 1 2/10 centimeters by 1 centimeter, and that was a nearly round defect with flaps. And I'm sorry, one detail that I left off of the entrance wound, which is also important in making a determination of the angle of the path of the bullet, is where the bullet undermines, and that undermined at the aspect that was closer to the head. So again, consistent with an slightly upward path.
Dr. Simons, when you say that the exit is 1.2 times 1.0 nearly round, would that be inconsistent with a fragment?
No.
As opposed to a projectile entering or leaving the wound?
No, that could be consistent with the skin was stretched at the time that the bullet exited.
And you found no projectiles along that wound path, correct?
That's correct.
And you found no fragments of projectiles along that wound path, isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Now, going back to in the wound number 1 in this particular case, would it be fair to say, ma'am, that in all 3 of these bullet wounds, that it is your opinion that all 3 of them were caused by bullets that had first passed through the car door?
That is correct.
Okay. And it is your testimony, it's your opinion, that the 3 wounds that were inflicted upon Jordan Davis are are associated with the 3 shots that went through the rear passenger door. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So it is nowhere in your opinion that any of the other shots fired at that vehicle had any impact or had anything to do with the wounds to Jordan Davis's body, right?
Correct.
And now, ma'am, you've indicated that there was a number of organs that were injured along the path of wound number 1. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And the first one, one of the organs or one of the major areas of the body that was damaged, you've already said, was the aorta. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And that is the primary blood vessel, one of the largest in the body. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the vessel that carries blood from the heart to the rest of the body.
And there was a great deal of bleeding associated with that particular wound, therefore. Is that right, ma'am?
That's correct.
Okay. And so it would be fair to say that, and let me back up, there was relatively little bleeding associated with the leg wounds. Would that be fair to say?
There were not collections of blood, yes, that's correct.
Okay. So would it be fair to say then that it's more likely than not that the torso wound, given the relative loss of blood, was probably the first wound inflicted upon Mr. Davis?
I think that's a possibility, but I can't say with any certainty.
Okay. Well, because not only was there a lot of bleeding as seen by the photographs in his clothing, there was a lot of pooling blood internally. Is that right?
Well, that is correct, but you are looking at an area, for example, on wound number 3, which was superficial, meaning just shallow underneath the skin. I showed you with the probe where that was slightly lifting up the skin. So you're not talking about hitting a major blood vessel there. Then again, in the thigh, if there was no major blood vessel hit, then you're not going to see a large collection of blood. And so again, it's a possibility, but I can't say with certainty.
And I think that you describe the non-superficial leg wound as mildly hemorrhagic. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And as opposed to the way you describe wound number 1. Is that right?
That's correct, okay. Yes.
Now, Dr. Simons, given the position of the wound path that you've described for wound number 1, is that consistent with somebody sitting straight up with their left arm extended along the back seat?
No, it's not.
Okay. If someone were sitting in that position in the back seat of this vehicle where they were sitting straight up with their rear end firmly planted in the seat with their left arm extended along the back seat, isn't it true that the dowels that you placed would have missed the body entirely if that had been their position?
Let me make sure I understand this. So you are
Sure.
posing that the position within the vehicle is upright with the arm here or here out the window.
But it would, no, I'm talking about the left arm.
Up on,
Alongside the back seat of the car,
okay.
okay?
And so if that is a position that you are saying is the position of the body, then no, the dowels wouldn't represent the paths in the body, the wound paths. Am I understanding your question right?
Yeah, and again, if you'll give me a moment, I'm going to May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to try to get a photograph pulled up just to make sure that there's not any confusion as to what we're talking about.
Sure.
And I'm asking for State's Exhibit number 133, I believe. I'm sorry, I don't. That might not be the right one. May I, Your Honor? I apologize, Your Honor. What we have up on the screen right now is State's Exhibit number 95 in evidence. Dr. Simons, can you see that on your monitor?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So if you would imagine that the person is seated in the seat up close to the right-hand door where the dowels are coming through. Do you understand the position I'm talking about?
Seated presumably with their back along the back seat.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And with their left arm then extended along the length of the back seat.
Okay.
Okay? That top dowel, which you've indicated is the dowel that you believe is associated with the torso wound, the chest wound, correct?
Yes.
Okay. A person seated in the position that I've described, if you were to extend the line of that dowel out, that line would not strike a person sitting in the position I've just described. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
That line, with that door closed, that line would continue and either strike another passenger or someplace else in the vehicle if that line is extended. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, ma'am, many of your conclusions in this case are based, it seems to me, obviously you will correct me if this is not correct, is based on at least one factor being the closeness of quarters in terms of the car door, if it were open, correct?
If the door were open?
Yes. You mentioned several times near the end of your testimony that that the car door, it would be such cramped quarters based on your understanding of how far the car door could or could not open, that limits the range of positions that could be considered in this case. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And ma'am, would you agree that there are a number of positions that the human body can find itself in, especially while in movement, correct?
That's correct.
And that, would you agree, ma'am, that many of the positions that you've described could also be achieved by somebody standing next to a car with an open car door, open at some angle, and that person then moving into the car? Wouldn't that be fair to say?
No, I don't agree with that statement.
Okay.
I believe that if a person is standing outside of a vehicle, so when you're sitting, you have a greater degree of mobility and tipping or moving in unusual positions because you're supported with the seat underneath you. When you have 1 or 2 feet on the ground, you are less stable, and the range of motion has to be a different set of considerations than one when you're sitting. And from what I could see from that car door, the clearance was such that in order to be in line with those bullet tracks, you would not be able to find in that quick of a succession of shots a range of motion that could account for all 3.
Now, Dr. Simons, and I've moved forward, Your Honor, would it not be fair to say that you could approximate many of the positions that you demonstrated by having someone, if I am standing, this is the car, this is the car door in front of me, and by the way, while you only considered 3 positions, fully open, 45-degree angle and closed, again, isn't it true that a car door has a continuous range of motion between the closed and open position, correct?
It is correct that there is a continuum of motion. It is not correct that I only considered those. I focused on those, but again, by standing in that wedge between the door and the door frame, I could see what the clearance was. So now you've given the clearance, how little clearance there was between my body and the door with my limited range of motion, knowing that I'm approximately 2 inches shorter than Jordan Davis. That means that the variables that I haven't considered were from that approximate 45 degrees to approximately 90 degrees, so greater. And the information provided to me was that the door was not able to be open to a great degree because of how close the vehicles were.
Okay. So, again, information outside of your forensic examination, outside of the scientific or common sense use of the dowels, other information place parameters on the range of positions that you consider to be possible to have achieved these wounds. Is that fair to say?
Information that was provided to me and information that was then not provided to me, as well as my direct observation and photographs and the autopsy findings. So if it is not contested that the door is fully open because of the closeness of the vehicles, and that's the information presented to me, and it is not subsequently disputed, then I take that as a fact given to me by professionals who are doing their job.
Okay. So you are, and by that, what you mean is you're relying on the representations of either the detectives or the personnel from the state attorney's office in telling you certain facts, like it is uncontested that the car door couldn't open fully because of this. Is that correct?
Well, during the whole process, I have had interaction with state, defense, law enforcement. Nobody has presented that to me, so you're welcome to present it to me. I'm happy to consider. If you're telling me that a door was open, I'm happy to consider that because I've seen the vehicle. But, however, again, I am not a crime scene investigator and wasn't at the crime scene. I am not a law enforcement officer. I am not the people at Shands. We work as a team of professionals and information gets passed along, and I take that as a given. And if something does not make sense to me, I question it, much to the dismay of a lot of JSO law enforcement.
Thank you for that, Dr. Simons. My question was simply that you received, as you've said, you weren't at the crime scene, right?
That's correct.
You're not a crime scene reconstructionist, right?
That's correct.
Okay. You relied on information given to you by others that a particular fact was uncontroverted in deciding what part of that continuum of motion that most likely fit this scenario. Is that fair to say?
Ma'am, I just want to explain to you that the jury has a right to understand that it is par for the course that we are thinking people as forensic pathologists, and if something doesn't make sense to us, we raise a red flag and we say we need more information. So I take what is provided to me, but I don't take it in isolation, and I don't take it as a given fact if it doesn't make sense to me.
Was the answer to the question yes or no, ma'am?
It's not a yes or no question.
Okay. Did you consider any position outside, beyond the 45 degrees that you indicated in the car door? When you're saying because of the cramped quarters, I don't believe other positions are possible, are you in fact referring to the cramped quarters created by a car door sitting at a 45-degree open angle? Is that what you mean?
Yes, I am.
All right. So every time in your direct testimony, when you said that because of the cramped quarters, I don't believe other positions are possible, that's what you meant. The cramped quarters created at a 45-degree angle of an open car door.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So now, would it then be fair to say, ma'am, that if in fact the car door was open at some greater angle than 45 degrees, that might have an impact on the position that Mr. Davis was in at the time that these wounds were inflicted?
If you told me that it was slightly more, then I would say no, it doesn't change my opinion. If you told me that it was closer to 90 degrees and fully open, then I would say yes, that could change my opinion. But I was crammed in that space to a point at
Dr.
which...
Simons, your position within the car is not an issue.
You just asked with it...
Dr. Simons, just respond to a question, please.
Please repeat the question.
I asked if in fact that meant, and I believed you answered it, but then you went on, that if in fact that meant the car door was open at some degree greater than 45 degrees, that would in fact affect your opinion as to what range of positions might have Mr. Davis have been in at the time these wounds have been inflicted.
It might, depending on the angle.
Thank you, Dr. Simons. If I may have 1 moment, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Simons, I'm sorry, I think that's 135, if I'm reading that correctly. Do you see that on your screen, ma'am?
I do.
Okay. Now, this was a photograph that you actually took, is that right? Am I remembering that correctly?
This is a photograph that the photographer took on the day that we went to view the vehicle.
Okay. This was part of your visit to examine the car?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. And those dowels that are in the rear passenger seat were dowels that you placed there, is that right, ma'am?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, ma'am, if you consider a hypothetical in which the testimony has been that the front seat of the Durango, the red vehicle that we're looking at here, is aligned with the front seat of the vehicle that the defendant was in, what position would account for the angle of the dowels that are shown in your photograph number 135 with this door closed?
Without knowing whether or not the vehicles were parallel, and knowing that in at least one scene photo, there was room for that Durango to be parked at an angle in the parking spaces and still be confined within that space, I cannot tell you what might account for that angle or the position of the shooter.
Would it be fair to say, Dr. Simons, that in taking a look at your photograph, which has been introduced as exhibit number 135, that if you extend the line of the dowels towards the edge of the photograph, that would line up more with the back seat of a parallel car?
I don't know the size of that car. I can't answer that.
Okay. Because you don't know the size of the car?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Would it be fair to say that looking at that angle, it looks like it's coming out more straight on rather than at an angle? Would that be fair to say?
There is an angle to those shots through the door. They are not perpendicular to the door.
Okay. Certainly, they appear to be more perpendicular than the dowels that are placed
That's
in
correct.
the three. Just for the record, let me finish. The three shots going to the front passenger door. Would that be fair to say, ma'am?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, Your Honor, may I approach very briefly?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You mean the witness or for us? Oh,
I apologize.
need the court reporter?
I don't believe it to be necessary, Your Honor.
Ms. Hannigan.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Simons, it's my understanding that you testified in a hearing at another time as to your opinion in this case. Is that right?
I'm sorry?
You testified in a previous hearing regarding your opinion of Jordan Davis's position. Is that correct?
Yes?
Okay. And that based on some of the questioning during that pretrial hearing, that you then went out on May 12th and did some additional work. Is
No,
that
ma'am.
right?
Nope. I'm not going to let you ask a question that's not truthful.
In a prior testimony?
That'll work.
Okay. And based on questioning in that prior testimony, that you then went out on May 12th of this year and did some additional work. Is that right?
Yes?
And that additional work, you went out and confirmed your own opinion of Mr. Davis's position. Is that correct?
Not so succinctly, no. I went out to explore possibilities, and in the process, confirmed my opinion.
So you went out to explore possibility, and in the process, you confirmed your own prior opinion of Mr. Davis's position in this case. Would that be fair to say?
Yes?
That would be my problem. That would be my questioning on that issue.
And part of the point there, Doctor, is to not mention the prior trial. That's why she was dancing around
Yes.
a bit. It would just be, you wouldn't want to mention that.
Right.
With those questions having been asked, Ms. Corey, what do you want to say?
That's fine, I just want to say not been in the prior trial when Mr. Stroll was named.
All right, well, I'm asking you, if I allow that, what are you going to do?
What am I going to do?
Yes, because I think Ms. Hananias was interested in the court ruling on what your redirect might be able to be.
My redirect is to get up and be that.
Well, go right ahead.
You, Dr.
Why don't you proffer your redirect?
Ms. Hania asked you about your,
Microphone, please. Or just grab one and come closer if you like.
I'm trying to be, well, they can't hear us, right?
I hope not.
Well, I hope not too. Dr. Simons, my question would be that Ms. Hanania asked you about your personal visit to this vehicle and how it affected your opinion. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I follow the question. It's a subtlety that I'm just not understanding.
Dr. Simons, we're not pretending, but what we're doing is I'm trying to illustrate to the judge what I would get up on redirect and ask you if she asked you the question she just did.
Right.
My question on redirect would be, and it won't be immediately, it would be when she's through with you, I would get back up and say, Dr. Simons, Ms. Hanania asked you about your personal visit to the vehicle
Right.
after a prior hearing. Did that strengthen your opinion in any way?
It did strengthen my opinion.
That is how I would ask it, and I will make sure we write that down so that's the way I ask it.
Well, then, if that's the way you're going to do it, then I'm going to allow Ms. Hanania to do what she did, and you can ask what you did. Okay. Bring the jury.
Okay,
Well, wait a minute.
to make sure we're all good.
Yeah, what we don't want to have happen is we don't want to mention prior trial. That's why
Understood.
they're saying prior testimony or I've forgotten how you phrased it, testimony at a
Prior
prior
testimony.
proceeding or something like that. We just don't want to ever say, well, yeah, I remember at the last trial.
Right, and I can be careful not to say that, but I guess what I'm not understanding, again, it's a subtlety, and maybe I'm not supposed to get it, but, you know, if it was based on something that was posed to me, as opposed to,
What-
you know.
I think the point is that Ms. Hanania wants to bring out that you had an opinion at one point in time that based on additional information that came to you, you went out and did some additional work. And as I understand it, it just solidified your opinion.
Right, and it was in the interest of making sure that, you know, that all things were explored.
Correct.
As
But you
opposed to.
considered other information.
Exactly.
To see if it would change your opinion one way or the other.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's the point.
Okay,
but it's a little delicate as
Right.
to how we're gonna get
Okay,
there.
understood.
But everybody, so you understand, Ms. Hanania, you understand, and Ms. Corey, I understood the way you were gonna ask your question, so we should be good.
Yes, sir.
And then, not to put you on the spot there, Ms. Hanania, but after that, how much more do you think you have with Dr. Simons?
That might not be my next question, but I did want to go ask it. I hope that it's 5 or 10 minutes, Judge.
Okay.
I don't have that many
Okay.
questions left.
Bring the jurors on in.
Thank you, sir.
Jurors entering the courtroom.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You can resume your seats. If I'd been thinking clearly, I probably wouldn't have sent you into the jury room because I'm suspecting your lunch is in there. But sometimes as I said, hopefully we'll be finished with Dr. Simons in a few minutes, and then we'll take our lunch break. Ms. Hanania.
Thank you, Your Honor. If I may, Your Honor, have exhibit number 155, state's exhibit number 155 up on the screen.
Okay, I think it is. Can you see that, Doctor?
Yes, I can.
I apologize. Can we not have that on the screen?
Oh,
If I may have a moment, Your Honor.
I apologize for the record, that's state's exhibit number 151.
Is that up on your screen, Dr. Simons?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, I believe that you used this earlier in your direct examination to show the path of the wound to one of the injuries to the lower body. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Could you demonstrate the path wounds for both of the lower wounds within this x-ray, just to juxtapose those with each other? Could you do that?
I can give you an approximation.
That'd be great.
So, with the physical landmarks, again, being this area for the scrotal region, left leg, right leg, and here is the bullet for what I described as wound path number 2, and the approximate area that bullet entered and then traveled. I'm just going to refer to my notes for height of the entrance of number 3. Slightly lower, so we're looking at the entrance wound for number 3 being roughly somewhere here, again, sort of at the middle portion of the thigh, and ending approximately a centimeter above where it exited.
And the arrows that you've painted show the direction that the bullet was traveling in as it traveled through the body.
No, it shows it in the anatomic position.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, Dr. Simons, you also testified to a couple of other wounds, just briefly, and I want to go talk about those for a few minutes. There were some abrasion-type wounds that were also noted by you during your examination. Is that correct?
That is correct.
One of those was an abrasion to the forehead?
Was a superficial red abrasion on the right side.
Okay. And as you indicated earlier, an abrasion is a scraping of the skin, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, such as what may occur if one were to strike your head against some object, correct?
That's one possibility.
Okay. And that abrasion to the right forehead is consistent with someone striking their head against, say, a car door frame.
It's one possibility.
Now, Dr. Simons, you also noted on your report abrasions to the posterior of the body. Is that correct?
Yes.
And one of those you described as, I believe that you described during your direct examination as having a pattern to that abrasion. Is that right?
That's correct. It was a rectangular shape.
It's a rectangular shaped pattern to that abrasion. And again, abrasion is the scraping of the skin, right?
Correct.
One of the other ways an abrasion could occur to skin is by, my first example was by you striking your body part against something. The other way is by something striking you. Would that be fair to say?
That's correct.
Okay. And so this particular, would it be fair to say that in your examination of that vehicle that there were rectangular shaped objects on that car door?
You'd have to show me one, and I need to look at the size. And so that's why we photographed that with a ruler, so that if you want to present me with an object, we could make a one-to-one comparison. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. You would agree, Dr. Simons, there are protruding things like door handles and knobs that were on that car door. Is that correct?
Door handles and knobs were on that door.
I'm sorry?
Yes, door handles and knobs were on that door.
And that if the car door, and that if car door were swung, either by somebody closing it or by the force of a car being reversed and swung into something, that could cause abrasions to one's body. Would that be fair to say?
An object striking the body can cause an abrasion, if that's your question, yes.
Okay. Now, you also talked about stippling and soot, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Stippling and soot, you said, can be an indicator. First of all, you said as to what is an entrance wound. It can also give you some idea of distance. Would that be fair to say?
Only when there are no intermediary targets.
Okay, and I understand. Generally, one would expect to find soot and stippling if the shooter, or not the shooter, but the end of the barrel, the muzzle, is within 2 feet or less of the person that's being shot. Is that correct?
It depends on the gun. There are ranges for various guns, and that's what test firing is for.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that beyond a certain range that you would not expect to find soot and stippling? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Even if there weren't any intervening obstacles, is that fair?
That's correct.
And how is that generally described?
It depends on the gun, and it depends on the gunpowder, and it depends on the type of ammunition.
Okay. And would it be fair that generally speaking, within 2 feet for most guns and most ammunition, that you would expect to find some type of soot or stippling if there were not any obstacles between the muzzle and the person being shot? Or the surface?
Would that gun have a silencer, or would that gun have been modified in any way? And what are some of the other conditions?
Okay. Absent anything like that, would that generally be fair to say within under 2 feet, 2 feet or under?
In many guns, yes, you would see that.
Okay. All right. And by the time that you went out and took a look at this Durango yourself, it had been in the custody of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office for approximately a year and a half. Would that be